Welcome to Sullivan Street, where today we have an exciting guest, Geoff Harkness. Oh, geez, sorry. I wanted to have you pronounce before I record. I didn't want to have you pronounce it. Welcome to Sullivan Street, where we have special guest Geoff Harkness today. But first, let's say hi to Chris. Chris, how are you today?
Hey, I'm good. I'm good. A lot of concerts, a lot of good crow shows in the last couple of weeks as I've been listening to. So it's been good.
I know it's funny, partly because I guess we're doing the podcast, but it seems like there's all sorts of Counting Crows news, right? Like there's our podcast. We've been going to the concerts. The Banshee tour is in full effect, and there's been news there. And in the last couple months, a Counting Crows book was released, and that's what we're going to talk about today with Geoff Harkness. Geoff, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So the one question we ask all of our guests the first time they appear on our podcast is, before we get into the book, how did you become a big Counting Crows fan? Or, I mean, if you even want to delineate a regular fan or a hardcore fan, and what has kept you coming back even before this book?
Sure. Well, I heard Mr. Jones when it was released as a single to college radio. So prior to them playing on Saturday Night Live, I think I heard it in November or December of 1993. And just that song really hooked me. I got it on like a promotional CD, didn't know anything about the band, but I just remember playing the song over and over that night. This was a time when you couldn't just go to the internet and look them up and find out, everything about the group. So it wasn't right away that I discovered August and everything after. I don't remember seeing them on Saturday Night Live, but I certainly eventually found the album and fell in love with it just like everybody else. And was listening to it, and at some point, Mr. Jones came on, and I'm like, "That's this band." So I've been a fan of theirs ever since. It was unfortunately not until 1999 that I saw them for the first time live, but I did a little catching up because I saw them. I want to say maybe three times that in that first year that after seeing them for the first time. And one of those shows, the show that I saw in 2000 in Omaha, was just absolutely transformative. One of the best live shows I've ever seen. And I think that was, those types of shows were what really caught me as a fan. How amazing this band is live has kept me coming back and seeing them over and over again. I certainly think that anybody who's a fan of theirs would share that sentiment.
So wait, you were spinning Mr. Jones? Like, were you doing radio at the time?
No, I was working in a bookstore, and CMJ, College Music Journal, featured Mr. Jones in the November 93 issue because it was just released to college radio. So it's the second song on that promotional sort of giveaway CD that came with the magazine. Working at the bookstore, we got all of the free copies that didn't sell at the end of the month. So I'm a huge music fan. I always took that CD home with me. And that was just on there that month. And that particular song, I mean, it was like a lightning bolt. I know I played it 20 times that night, just over and over and over again. I thought this is like one of the most incredible songs I've ever heard. I had no idea who the band was or anything about them.
That also sounds like one of those, everyone has like those teenage dream jobs, and you're like, free music magazines. Tremendous.
God,
what more could I ask for in employment?
Yes. And some of those, like the imports, it was the Borders. We had all the imports, like the British music magazines, NME and Q and stuff. These are like $15, $20 even back then. So it was heaven for a big music fan like me.
So we didn't mention it by title yet, but the book that you wrote is called Rain King, The Life and Music of Adam Duritz and Counting Crows. And I think the title's great. And in a way, I was glad then that we named our podcast Sullivan Street, not Rain King, so we didn't get confused. Because I almost did, or I almost said the Rain Kings or something. But I also like that you said Adam Duritz and Counting, because a lot of it does focus on Adam, especially, I guess, the first half of the book. But you do talk about the group as well. Both of us have a lot of questions about what you said or in the book. Oh, and by the way, it was released, I think it was May 11th of 2023, right?
Yeah, it basically just came out a couple of months ago.
And we'll plug it again at the end, but I know it's available on Amazon, by Kindle. That's how I bought it. And it looks now you can actually buy paperback and hardcover.
Yeah, it's available in all three of those formats. And eventually, won't be long, we should have an audiobook pretty soon as well.
Fantastic. So,
And spoiler alert, I
yeah.
recommend it.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
Eric does too. We both like it. Let's start with
oh,
there.
no,
We highly recommend the book.
I devoured it. And in fact, there's part of me that thinks that any
Thank you.
hardcore Crows fan that's listening to our podcast might have already bought the book, but just in case, and to remind them and or new listeners to the podcast, I do want to ask though, before we get into the detail, kind of like the first episode of our podcast, we said, oh, why did we want to start a podcast? I mean, what made you decide to write a book? I mean, even I knew that maybe there was an open space in the market for it, but I certainly wasn't going to have the energy to do it. And then how long did it actually, if you want to talk about maybe the process a little bit, how long did it take you to write it, et cetera?
So, I mean, I've been writing for a really long time. I got my first job as a journalist in 1999, and I've been writing regularly ever since then. And I was a music journalist for 5 or 6 years. After that, I got into really scholarly and academic writing like peer-reviewed journal articles. And that's a particular type of writing. It's different and challenging, but also has its limitations too, and sort of structural things. And then I got into the last frontier, which was books. And so over the last 10 years, I wrote 3 scholarly academic monographs published with university presses. But for me, so writing is just, it's almost like breathing to me. It's just what I do and have always done. These types of books, these books about bands and rock bands, to me, like probably one of the greatest joys in my life since I was a child, really, was sitting down and reading an amazing book about an incredible musical artist or band, and then also listening to their music as I read the book. And today I still think that that's one of my great joys in life. And I love these books. I always have. I've read them since I was probably 7 or 8 years old. And I've read them all, and I'm a huge fan of the genre. And to me, it was just always absolutely stunning that there wasn't a book about Counting Crows. I've been honestly just waiting for this book to be published by someone for like 20 years, because I read these books, and it's like, how could there be, so many books about Bruce Springsteen or the Rolling Stones or Prince, wonderful artists, REM, so many great books and great artists, but how is there not a book detailing Counting Crows? I always wondered that. So finally, I just decided kind of that I would I would write it. They say that writers should write the books that they want to read, and this is this is the exact book that I've always wanted to read, I guess. Yeah.
That's great. And I don't want to, I know what you said about the academic writing being very different. I do want to mention, I did at least briefly look at your other books. You had at least one other book on music, right? On hip hop, even though it was more of an academic, I guess, book. So you have, and you said your journalism background, you have written about music before.
Oh, yeah. No, I have a deep background in music. And in fact, my dissertation research in Chicago was a 6-year study of the underground rap music scene. And my first book is about the relationship between gangs and rap music in Chicago. So that was a very sort of in-depth project, totally different genre. And my third book is a 20-year study of a rap group from the middle of Kansas that almost made it, but didn't make it. And usually we hear the stories like Counting Crows of the famous artists. And so I wrote a book about a band no one's ever heard of. And I spent 20 years doing it.
Taking a brief aside from your book for a second, I just wanted to have a couple lines in here to make all of us and our listeners feel better about themselves, which is that all 3 of us, for example, have dabbled in academia. And I say that because I only found out this like 2 weeks ago that someone did, and I don't know how good the study was, but somebody in 2014 tried to do some kind of quantitative study about the average IQ of people that like certain bands. And Counting Crows it was Beethoven, Counting Crows, and someone I never heard about, which you probably all, who I guess was very popular. What is it? Sufjan Stevens. Do you know Sufjan Stevens? Right. So those 3 fans of Beethoven, Counting Crows, and Sufjan Stevens had the highest IQ. And you know what made me feel really good? That Pearl Jam fans were very average intelligence, which by the way ties into the fight that's in your book about Pearl Jam criticizing Counting Crows on the Coke commercial. And I respect Pearl Jam, but something about them and Eddie always kind of got on my nerves, and I was on Team Adam. And so I'm glad that we all have superior intellect, everybody that listens to this podcast, to Pearl Jam fans. So.
And we don't want to exclude any of the Guar fans out there either, because we know that you are very well read too. So So a little shout
So
out to the Guar fans as well.
yeah, no, and it's not a great study. I mean, it's basically like looks at like most popular at certain colleges and translates like SAT
Right.
scores to. It's not
Oh, right,
great.
right, right. Yeah. Did
It's
you
not
see that
a
bit?
great study.
Did you see that? So interesting
But
though,
for our
and
purposes, it makes
it,
we accept it as brilliant
it's the best.
because it proves that we are very smart people for liking Counting Crows.
And I saw that Ben Folds was also in the
Genius.
top like 5 or 6, which made me laugh because we have 2 of their ex band members with the Counting Crows, right? So that made me laugh too. So yeah, let's focus on the book, and Chris and I can take turns. And if you just there's something you want to talk about, either from the book or things you didn't talk about in the book. One thing I guess I just want to say, I appreciate that, not content wise, but I guess format wise, I really like that, you focus, a bit on him growing up, but not too much, right? It's not just about his childhood. And then you talked about early days with the band, and that was great. And I thought it was the best way in the latter part of the book to separate it by album title. I thought that was the best way to do it. Chris, any other
Well, and I'll say
thoughts?
one of the interesting things was that in terms of like a discussion of Adam's sort of pre Counting Crows life, I feel like I'd heard a lot of those stories in pieces, and just in general, I feel like you did a really good job of kind of tying it through and kind of going, let's kind of create a coherent story here, because I feel like we've been hearing all these things in bits and pieces over the years, and you kind of put all the things together and go, okay, now I have a little bit better picture of this journey as opposed to just hearing the snippets, and particularly the snippets that come out a lot, right? I mean, traveled across the country. Yes, that we know that he was moving around a lot as a kid. That comes back a lot. But then the actual
Yes,
sort of some of
yes.
the details within there I thought were really interesting. What did you pick up on? Anything that surprised you as you were kind of pulling that together?
Um, well, I mean, in the same way, it was sort of a synthesis of things that I was sort of familiar with the overall trajectory of the story, but there were so many details that came out in doing the research and looking into it that many things, sort of surprised me. And also, I wanted to sort of show, I was very interested in focusing on the music. And so this is why the chapters are built around the making of each one of their albums, and really sort of focused on what was going on in Adam's life, what was going on in the life of the band, who was the producer, where was it recorded, how were the songs written, how did they change once they went on the road. I was sort of really interested in that part of the story, which I feel is often absent from these types of books. You'll read, like, I mean, I'll just give you an example that many people have probably read, The Dirt, which is that fun book about Motley Crue. You won't get almost anything about their music in that book, though. And I thought, don't you guys respect your music enough to write about it? So I really wanted to, yeah, maybe
They
not,
don't.
but right, but like, you would just think that the music is more central to the story. So I really wanted to foreground the music in the writing of the story and build it around there. Then in going through it, there were so many parts of that story that did surprise me. So even something like the skirmish with Eddie Vedder, I knew about the Coke commercial, but I had no idea about the Eddie Vedder thing. And there were so many pieces like that along the way. The
That was one
other
of the more
thing that,
interesting things for me too, as someone who's like been following and reading about the band a lot. Like, I'm like, maybe I heard a sentence about this, but the details of them going kind of back and forth with it, I thought were very interesting. About
right,
how annoyed Eddie Vedder seemed to get about this, and how annoyed Adam got back for him getting annoyed.
right, right.
I mean, it is so 90s, right? Because Eddie Vedder is literally the poster child of the word, you shouldn't be a sellout. And it's funny because most Counting Crows fans would say that Adam Duritz is also one of those people, right? Very, that he's very idealistic and does things his own way and not a sellout. And I think that was part of this tension. Because Adam was probably like, are you kidding me about this? Right.
And for those
So,
who don't know the story, I don't want to spoil anything in the book, right? But Counting Crows did do a Coke commercial in 2002, around the time of the release of Hard Candy, with the
American
song
Girls,
American
right?
Girls.
Yeah, yeah.
And what prompted Eddie? Did Eddie Vedder just make a comment? Was it that he on something and Adam kind of shot back?
Yeah, I think he there was a quote that came out, Eddie Vedder sort of putting down Counting Crows and some other artists who had done commercials, and sort of saying, they're out of the club now. And then Duritz also fired back in the press. in the book, one of the things that I did was I sourced everything so you mega fans could go in and find the actual source of it, because there's often a lot more. I didn't quote everything that Adam Duritz, for example, said about this situation. There's even more, so the super fans can track down the original sources and read up even more. But there was some back and forth in the press, and then the interesting part is that I had no idea is that Eddie Vedder shows up backstage at a Who concert where Counting Crows are opening, and leaves this book for Adam Duritz about the evils of the Coca-Cola Corporation. And Adam then, gets it and has a quote in the press saying, yeah, I read the book, and, you can sort of read about it there. But there was just more to those. I had no idea about any of that stuff until I was doing the research and writing the book. So to me, somebody who was always a big fan and had followed the story, there were many times where I was just surprised to hear, or to find out the details, or also to be reminded, like the thing where Matt Malley wrote the letter to Rolling Stone. I remember that when it happened, but I had
also around the same time.
I
Yeah.
had forgotten about that. And so reading it, it's like, oh yeah, I remember. So some things were just had been lost to the sands of time.
But you know what those two things have in common? It's funny, I was just about to say this, and this almost ties to what Chris's comment was, which is that the one great thing about this book for hardcore fans is that you might have heard, you're going to find out new things, but there's things that or the bits and pieces were everywhere, and then Geoff synthesizes it. And also, don't forget, Counting Crows, when they started, was, I guess you can say, arguably pre-internet, early forms of the internet. We're starting 95-ish. And then, but a lot of this of like the Coke, even some fans, Counting Crows fans, of course, didn't like that Counting Crows were on a Coke commercial, and also the Matt Malley thing. But where the news was about this was like on the Counting Crows message boards, but all that's gone now, right? So like,
right.
So almost like to find out, and as you said, was even tough to find the Matt Malley editorial or letter now. So I guess what I'm saying is that that's one nice thing, especially for newer fans. You're like, oh, because some of this stuff isn't even online, partly because it predated, online documentation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was very important to me that even hardcore fans find some new things in this book that they didn't know. And, hopefully like, oh, wow, I had no idea or didn't know that story. So I hope even the super fans will find some things that are new to them. That was my hope. I certainly learned a lot of new things, and I consider myself at least a reasonably big fan.
Yeah, I'm curious. Were you able to dig up much of the sort of message? Because I know Adam has been involved in different Counting Crows official message boards for a long.
Right.
I mean, really going back even I think to AOL, and I remember that period in 2003, 2004 where he was posting a lot. But all of that seems basically gone, unless I assume there's ways to do deep dives on like maybe archive.org or something, but the Wayback Machine. But were you able to find much of that, or just sort of bits and pieces, or?
So it's hard to say how much of it I found, because I don't know how much content there is.
Exists, yeah.
But I was able to try. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is out there. You would be surprised that you can track down some of his old writings like that. Once you find one, you can start to Google those sentences and passages from those to find others. So I was able to track down some of that. Now, how much of it, I don't know. And also, one of the things I would have loved to have written more about in the book was how, sort of innovative the band was around the internet, especially Adam getting on the internet so early, interacting with his fans. I wish that more of that had sort of been in the book, or like sort of giving them credit for that, because they were very early at sort of pioneering some of this stuff. I think some of the arguments they had with Geffen were around the band wanting to just give away their music for free, and Geffen being like, this is the one thing that we sell, and so we're not so sure about that. But the arguments with the record companies, I think they were very pioneering in that sense. And I was one of those fans who was around during that time. I mean, I remember when Adam was calling us all unpleasant people on the message boards back in the day. So I remember reading some of that too. And it was always very interesting to me as a fan that he would come on there and interact with us. I mean, it was kind of incredible that this artist who was a huge rock star, but also that you were a fan of, would actually come on there. And it wasn't like he answered questions, but he was certainly clearly a reader of it, and weighed in from time to time.
But you're right. It's kind of was a sign of things to come, right? Look what happened to the internet. What happened to the internet since then.
Right.
And you could go on any celebrity's Instagram or whatever, and every celebrity could say, "You are all miserable, snarky, evil people," right? Because
Right.
60%
He
of the
was right.
comments are usually, yeah, he was right about that.
Adam
And
was right. Yeah.
No, I don't want to talk about it too much, but what I laugh
Yeah.
now is I go back and look to that Coke commercial, and I say, how cool was it that they were so in the mainstream
Yeah.
that Coke said, "We want to have you," and I was like, look, and it's not just Adam, it's the whole band. There's Charlie and there's Dave and Matt, and they're all on national TV. I don't know. I thought, looking back, to me, it's kind of cool actually. But
well, it's also
Chris,
that time period. People kind of forget the context of that time period, which is like Willie Nelson's doing a Gap ad, like almost at the exact same time, with
Yeah.
interestingly Ryan Adams' friend Ryan Adams. There's all sorts of that. I don't know. There's just some things that are of the time where you feel like, well, again, if literally Willie Nelson and freaking Bob Dylan are doing Gap ads, like, who am I to sit? Like, I have to be a real miserable person to be like no to, Coke,
yeah.
right? I mean, is it really the worst?
So one thing I do want to also compliment you on that's more general, such as the organization of the book. I did want to say, now I don't want to say could criticize, but it wasn't comprehensive, which actually is good because you could write about in future books, or maybe some you couldn't find information. But one thing I did really like is that when you talked about the albums, maybe where possible, you would put a sentence or two about particular songs, particularly if you found like a fun fact about that song, or maybe if a
Yeah.
fan didn't know what that song was about. As I said, the only thing bad is when you started doing it, and then I was like, well, you didn't talk about this particular song. Why didn't you do that? Where's the inside info on Carriage or something? But like, for just a random
No.
example and not something I even knew or even care about, but I just took this right now that, like, I Wish I Was a Girl was either some sort of tribute or inspired by a song, I Wish I Was Your Mother, by what was it, Matt the Hoople or something, which I didn't even know. But
Yes.
you had that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm just saying I
Oh,
did
good.
like that. And because there were certain songs that I actually didn't know, maybe either the inspiration or the origins or what the main, so that those little nuggets, even though they were brief, I really appreciated that. Anything you want to share about a particular song that maybe, I guess is a hard question, that maybe people don't realize what the actual inspiration was, or something interesting you found when researching that?
Well, I mean, you were just saying, I just literally am listening to these New Orleans shows that you sent me. Adam talks about Carriage in one of those shows and what it
Yes.
means, and I had not heard that. Like, maybe I obviously heard it when I was in New Orleans, but I certainly didn't remember it, and so I didn't realize it was this song about a miscarriage, and that's what the title refers to. I absolutely would have included something like about that in the book. I just, this is the problem with a book like this. You can't listen to every single show and know
Right.
every track down, every little fact. I wish I could. And, I mean, fortunately with technology today, sometimes you can make some, adjustments and things like that. So, maybe I'll sneak that in there.
Or for the
A
follow-up
quick
book
revision.
in 10 years, you'll have other things to talk about.
The
Chris, do you
revised.
have
Yeah.
Well, part of it, what's interesting is that, like, because I've listened to, again, I've always loved the tapes, and surprised sometimes when you go back and listen to something you haven't listened to in a while, and you're like, I definitely listened to the show. I did not remember that. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that kind of stuff where you're
Right.
like, how? I guess that left my brain at some point. I thought I was carrying all of this around with me, but apparently, occasionally, I do forget things.
So I don't know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Chris. I don't know if you have any particular. Guess I'm going to mention either some things I want his thoughts on, or just certain observations that I don't think are major revelations, but just things that, for me as a hardcore fan, are things that I didn't really know for sure for whatever reason. So one of it was, okay, I'll just pick this one. How Saturday night, Sunday, and I don't know why I didn't know this, maybe because I was overseas doing things and just busy, how Saturday night, Sunday mornings, how almost half the songs were kind of older songs that I mean, I knew that 1492 was an older song, but you let me know that, like, Come Around was written before, and there's a couple songs, I mean, about a handful, right, from Saturday night, Sunday mornings. And you also
Sundays.
yeah, Sundays, and
Yeah,
you
Los
also
Angeles is old.
yep, yeah,
Los
exactly. And
Angeles. Yeah.
I've thought for sure that they were all new. And you also explained one thing I didn't really know and was always wondering: why didn't they rent A House on the Hill for that one, because that's a major change, right? Because Adam basically said
Huge. Yeah.
when he recorded Recovering the Satellites, we're never not going to record a studio LP unless we rent a house. And they did that
Right.
for 4 of their 6 major releases, but the last 2 they did not. And I guess you didn't get into why they didn't do it for the most recent, except for maybe hinting about family. A lot of them are older, maybe family. But anyway, any thoughts on that? And I guess you were just saying that mentally he wouldn't be able to maybe handle. But anyway, just your thoughts on that.
So Saturday Night, Sunday Mornings was an album, excuse me, that I kind of rediscovered in some ways, or listened to anew when I was writing this book, and enjoyed it a lot. One of the reasons I think I enjoyed it more was discovering that songs like Sundays in Los Angeles in 1492 had been recorded during the sessions for prior albums. So like, do you like This Desert Life? Well, then you should go listen to Sundays, because you might hear it a little bit differently if you realize it was recorded with that band by those producers in the, during that time. It'll cause me to hear the songs differently and appreciate them in different ways. And that was true for Los Angeles and even 1492 as well. So I think that just knowing that about the albums made me understand it differently, hear it differently, and come to appreciate some of those tracks a little bit more, or at least hear them differently. So that was part of it. And then what was the second part?
Well, I don't remember, but doesn't that even put more emphasis on then possible whatever they call either lack of either writing block, or maybe doesn't want to do albums right? So if that was the largest gap, right, that was it 6 years since Hard Candy, and then right, they haven't been releasing a lot of albums, but then you say, wow, half of that album was actually formally written, right? And even Recovering the Satellites, we were saying recently when we reviewed one of the 1994 shows, that a lot of Recovering the Satellites was written before they got in the studio. So it's I don't know,
Well,
it's
that
just
was
interesting.
I was listening to one of the shows this week when they played Recovering the Satellites. He talked about how he found that the song Recovering the Satellites is from the cassette, some cassette demo that was the back half of someone. He asked for someone to send him a cassette of August and Everything After the song, and the back, he's like, that song still sucks. um but the back half, the second side, was Recovering the Satellites, and he was like, oh shoot, this is a perfect song to sum up the feelings that I'm having. He wrote it several years before Satellites,
Oh, I had no
apparently.
idea.
Yeah,
Yeah, wow.
I don't think I'd ever heard that story before, and he was just casually telling this on a Wednesday night in Providence or something. And it was really interesting that but yeah, that a lot of times he's used some of that older stuff. But Saturday Night to Sunday Mornings is the most, because even if you look at the stuff that's new that hadn't been recorded before, a lot of it by that point was older, right? That Washington Square is 2003. On a Tuesday in Amsterdam is 2004. It's written like the same week as Accidentally in Love.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff that was kind of pulled together. And even like something like Los Angeles, which is interesting because there's so much stuff that's so much of that time, right? Because it's written with Bryan Adams and Dave Gibbs, and literally he's like, I think he pointed out, it's like, oh, this is my verse, this is my Ryan's verse, this is Dave's verse, and you're like, oh, if you weren't thinking about that contextually, you're like, what the hell does Boston have to do with this song?
Nashville. Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and also I think just going back, Eric, to your earlier point or question about the house versus the studio, I agree with you that was a significant change in terms of just for the whole band. And also part of this, it kind of in some ways it goes back to the same thing with the Coke commercial, which was they were so staunch early on in certain positions, and one of which was, we will never record in a studio because they're too sterile. I don't want to spend the whole session sitting by the Coke machine in the lobby. There are all these, so
and about
many
this
quotes.
group collaboration, that everyone's there when they're finally putting it together, and that's not exactly the case anymore, right? It seems to be a couple like for Somewhere in the Wonderland, I guess you kind of hinted, or if you look in the liner notes, I might be wrong here, but Adam did a lot by himself, and then later brought in Immy, Dan, and Millard. And then that was the next stage, and then the third stage was bringing in, whatever, maybe Dave and Jim and stuff. So, yeah.
So I think that just that their change in position is something that it gets captured in the book, because you see their sort of earlier stance And as we go chronologically, you see how that changes and how that adjusts. And I think in the same way that they were sort of taken to task for the Coke commercial in light of their earlier anti-commercial stance, the people talk, the same thing, like, well, you sort of say that you're going to, record only in houses, and this is how it's done, and this is how it's organic, and this is how we capture the vibe, and it's so important to us. And then you sort of discard that and go in a different direction. So I think in some ways it hits at that same thing, where they kind of get knocked for those choices based upon taking such a harsh stance on it earlier on,
And I do somewhat understand, not somewhat, but I do understand the mental health struggles. And I like that you
For
really
sure.
emphasized some of the prescription medicine issues that he was fighting with, in addition to depression and all sorts of, and understandable maybe why Saturday nights, Sunday mornings. Anyway, I guess he never commented on why they haven't returned to houses, right? Like, I guess the only other studio album would be Somewhere in the Wonderland, but I guess there was never any comment about why that wasn't recording in a in a
Does
house.
he need to though? Because it's like they all
No,
have kids. A
they
bunch of
just
them have
don't do it
kids. They all
anymore.
live on different coasts. Like,
Yeah, I
Right.
guess. Although I was thinking about that, and then my other response was, well, they do tour for months.
sure.
They
Yeah.
do tour
Oh,
for
yeah.
months. So why couldn't they rent a house for 6 weeks instead of touring for one? I don't know. That was just
Yeah, that's fair enough.
that was just a thought.
One
Just
thing
'cause
I want to point
yeah,
out,
please.
so in the context of the sort of early their anti-commercial positions, I do think, Geoff, you kind of bring out some details about the development of the band, and in particular the marketing of the band, that I think do
Mm-hmm.
kind of get lost to time, right? I think we all sometimes forget a little bit, like, they were on a major label with a heavy
Yeah.
hitter manager, and they were doing, and again, I don't think this cheapens anything, but they were doing a lot of work to get noticed. Like, I feel like in the story, it kind of always goes, we did Round Here on SNL. We were never supposed to be anything, and that sort of shoots us into the moon. And it's like, well, they were supposed to get somewhere. They were on a major that was pushing them with somewhat hard. Maybe they weren't meant to sell 10 million records, right?
Right.
They certainly overshot the moon there, even for the standards of the time. But
Right,
they
but
were not. They're it's an underdog story, but maybe not as much of an underdog as one sort of looks back on and thinks of them at the time.
you're
Yeah.
exactly right, because just the fact that all those record labels were bidding for them shows you that they weren't, and all of them were going to promote Counting Crows very heavily. So yeah, I did get
Mm-hmm.
that too. That there was more of a corporate influence. That it doesn't mean it was an artificial band, but there's more of a corporate influence to help their success in the beginning than maybe Crows fans realize.
Yeah, but I think partially when we're fans of any band out there, we don't often see what goes on behind the scenes. We don't see sort of how the sausage is made. To me, it was very important to show that in this book, not because I think Counting Crows is unusual in this regard. I think this is how it works. I don't care if you're REM or Stone Temple Pilots or U2 or Counting Crows. When you're on a major label, this is how it works. There's everything from stylists to photographers to producers to executives like Gary Gersh. And Counting Crows were very lucky to have somebody like Gary Gersh who loved their music, who understood the band, and who wanted to see them do well. So he was a powerful person who took personal interest in them. This is often how it works. This is how somebody gets to be, Taylor Swift or Counting Crows or one of those groups. It's not, yes, they're incredibly talented, but also they have somebody in the industry. And in this case, there were several people who just went, we are such fans of what you're doing here, and we can see it, that we're going to put you, into the sort of star making machine. But again, I don't think that means that, Counting Crows is some corporate band or was put together. I think this is how it works,
Well, it's part of, I think part of it's not just how you get there, but what you do once you get there, right? I think one of the reasons why this band has endured so long is that they got really popular and then took those chips and said, no, we don't want to get more popular. We want to get more freedom, right? Even if we're going to piss off, part of the beauty of what they've been able to do comes in part from the idea that, they sold 10 million copies of that first record. So if you piss off half the people, there's still 5 million people. And if you piss off half the people the next time, there's still 2 million, and a certain level where you can kind of keep going. And that's part of the attitude I think they've had, for 30 years. I mean, a band not playing Mr. Jones in concert as frequently as they did over the years, that's ballsy, right? That's a pretty big thing to take one of your biggest hits and say, I'm willingly gonna piss people off because I believe that I'm gonna make a bunch of other people happy and they'll keep coming to see me. The person that was gonna come see Mr. Jones once, screw them. Don't worry, they weren't gonna come back anyway, kind of thing. That's kind of where I think they've had made that interesting distinction. And I think that is the one decision I give the most credit to, like to Adam
Yeah.
outside of a market, right? Is the idea to be different as a live band every night. That to me is always kind of like, that's part of what sustained them. And that's him, right? No record executive told them you should start changing up the songs every night.
Yeah, no, that's really well stated, Chris. And I think those artistic choices that Adam made and that Counting Crows made are why we love them so much, and because they did continually, I think, change their sound. They never retreated back to August and everything after. They never went and rehired T-Bone Burnett to try to recreate the magic. And they easily could have done that. Every single person on Geffen wanted them to do that, and they said no. And they said, we're here to create art, not commercial hits. And I respect. That was one of the reasons I'm a fan of the band. I respect those decisions a lot.
You know what's so funny though? I was thinking about this recently when watching some of the live the Banshee tour on YouTube, which is that, of course, the hardcore fans are there. Like the three of us will probably go every tour, at least one show. But ironically, despite even some people saying that, oh, they didn't play Mr. Jones when I went in 2001, I'll never see them again. What's so interesting is because they were such an iconic 90s band, is that they do still have a lot of, probably more casual fans are going now than, I don't want to say in the beginning, but then like 15 years ago. Right now, there's all of these fans that maybe do only know the hits, and maybe they did see them once 20 years ago, but they're like, oh, Counting Crows, they had a bunch of songs. That'll be a good concert, right? So that's kind of interesting that they came back anyway, even though maybe they didn't play Mr. And of course, now they are playing Mr. Jones mostly every night. So,
pretty much, yeah.
They have. I'm sorry, I was just gonna say they have hits. Like this is a band with a deep catalog of great songs that people know. Even people who aren't fans of them know their songs, and not just the ones from their first album. My 8-year-old daughter loves "Accidentally in Love." Loves that song. She doesn't know what Counting Crows are. So they have lots of fans out there who who don't care. If they play Rain King or not in the set list tonight.
Well, this is fun. I guess I have different points I want to make, but I guess this will transition to one that, as you hinted to in the book, and I kind of knew this, and I'm so happy that they are still playing, right? I was thinking about this when I saw them at the Troubadour last year. Hey, they're not going to live forever. The band's not going to be around forever. And it's so nice that my favorite band is still playing. And even though they're playing, some people would say more hit or more predictable set list, they still do play deep cuts. They will play the suite now. Are some fans sick of the suite? Maybe, but
not all the time.
Right,
that's one thing we've seen recently over the last couple of weeks. They've written set lists without the suite in it, which is interesting. And the first time they've done that since they came back, but that they're trading out, saying, "Oh, we'll do, if we're doing Potters and Elizabeth and Round Here, we're going to leave out the suite to leave room for other songs," which is cool. That again, I'm not, as we've talked about at great length, Eric, right? Not against the suite, just maybe the problem is the suite in the same place every night, all stayed together. That kind of hurts the flow of the shows. But, if they're not going to put it there every night, that kind of changes the game a little bit.
Yep. And when it was released, I do appreciate that they did play the entire thing, because, there's nothing worse, I think, than being a hardcore fan of a band and they release something new and then you see them in concert and they maybe play one song off the new album, right? Because they only play the greatest hits. So I actually love that they do that. But what I was kind of hinting at was, I guess, and you really get to this, if you look at their career, and Chris, I think you even said this in one of the earlier shows, they're primarily a touring band, right? That's, if you look at their career, and it's hard for me to admit that sometimes because I'm more of a diehard obsessed with their studio albums, I guess, than, even though I finally did the calculation. I've seen them 19 times. Because I think, Chris, you said you were like 50?
50 something.
And then Geoff, what about you? Do you know? I finally calculated.
It's not that many. I've seen them 10 times.
Okay, 10, right. So and mine, it was a couple short bursts. I had 5 one year, 3 another.
Yeah, because I was because living in New York, there were some stretches where I did not have to go very far to see the band a lot, and they were playing very well, such that it was like, well, if they're playing again, I'm going to go see them. But when they're playing 3 nights in a row in a place that's like just over the river, it's not a heroic act on my part to have seen them so many times in certain ways.
Yeah, so it anyway. So I got, and you kind of I think hinted this, and I'll go to you, but you can talk about again them versus album, because what I did the math, because my math background is that they have six, I guess, studio albums if you don't count Underwater Sunshine and you don't count the EP. Four of them were released in a span of 10 years. The first four, 9 years
Right.
really, and then since then they've had three albums, one of those being a cover albums, in 20 years, right? So now instead of every 3 years, they're released every 7 years. So yeah, anyway, it's interesting. And I know that I guess a lot of bands, this happens, right? The production, the output goes a little low, but.
Yeah, right. Well, I was gonna just say, Chris, that I thought they're playing the EP every night was another example of one of those artistic decisions where they say, we have a new piece. We know you'd rather hear the hits, but we're going to come out and play our new thing that you're unfamiliar with, and it's 20 minutes of the show. And that's because it's an artistic decision. We're not doing it to please you. We're doing it to please ourselves as artists. And I absolutely respect them for doing that. And I would rather see them play that than see them play Round Here one more time. For sure, just because I know, that they're absolutely committed to it. I was just going to ask the two of you, though, having seen all these shows, what was your favorite show?
The two that spring to mind, one is the August and Everything After show at Town Hall, that the one that ended up being the DVD, is a spectacular, and that's actually, it's interesting because that DVD is essentially the first half of the show. They played all of August and Everything After, then a bunch of new songs, which would be on Saturday nights and Sunday mornings, and then a bunch of covers and stuff, including one with Chris Carrabba, who of course they're touring with this summer. And then also the one that I always go to, that is, it's not one show, but they did 3 nights at the Wellmont Theater in 2008, and with the exception of Long December and two different versions of Rain King, didn't repeat a song. And so those 3 nights in a row are sort of burned in my mind of like the peak of like, this band is just giving me everything and all sorts of wild surprises and different things where it was like, oh yeah, I'll follow this band. You tell me where they're playing, I'm going. If it's anywhere near me, because who knows what might happen next. Right. It's kind of the thing, again, I think they've lost a little bit over the last decade, is that sense of what might happen next. And again, things are dropping out of the sky recently. Like they played Accidentally in Love and Angels the Silences, they started playing again. But in the overall scheme of things, they're a little bit more of a predictable band than they were 10 years ago. But that's okay. But that's part of what I think sometimes these things that keep you going is like, this band really was. And then again, you look at those shows, those New Orleans shows in 2001, interestingly, they're playing 2 nights in a row. A lot of the songs are repeats, but the repeats are not the popular songs. They're brand new songs at the time. So, and I should mention, but we were talking about shows we went to as we were preparing to record this, and Geoff said, you said you drove how long to see them in New Orleans in 2001?
It's like 1,000 miles, basically.
What got you to do that? Because that's a pretty amazing dedication.
Well, that they were playing new songs, it was like the Counting Crows are on the road and they're playing new songs from their unreleased album, and they're going to be playing at a small club 2 nights in a row in New Orleans, I was somebody who spent a considerable amount of time in my 20s shutting it down in New Orleans myself. A good friend of mine was a bartender at the French Quarter there, which was a good person to know, who also happened to have a kind of weird, long story, but a spare apartment that friends could use. So anytime I wanted, I could drive down to New Orleans with friends of mine. I had a free apartment to stay, and a friend who was a bartender in the French Quarter. So I, needless to say, made that trip a number of times. And when Counting Crows announced those shows, the tickets were like $25, $30 back then. I called one of my oldest friends and said, you want to drive to New Orleans and see Counting Crows 2 nights in a row? He said, absolutely. So off we went.
But that's awesome. And then that's the beauty of them doing 2 nights, is you're not like, well, they're going to be 2 different evenings. So now I guess I've got to go to both. Right. And was it like a whole weekend in New Orleans, essentially? like a Friday
Yeah,
and a Saturday or something?
I don't think it was. I mean, I have the tickets here. Let me see if it tells. I've actually found the old ticket stubs. Here we go. Yeah, this was on a Monday and Tuesday in August. I remember. Yeah, there you go. Something I always remember about it, looking back, was this was August 27th and 28th, 2001. So this is just before 9/11. It's like, you know, I'm driving off to New Orleans to see Counting Crows. It's like, man, remember life before 9/11. Back when the world was totally different.
Well, it's so funny, of course, when he talks, and it's a year before, right? But when he sings Miami and tells the story, it's always about I could go up to the gate and greet my girlfriend
Right.
because it was before
Right.
9/11, and so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
I will say, does Miami kind of one of your favorites because of that, evoking that sort of feeling of that time in your life? Let's go shut it
Well,
down in New Orleans.
yeah, I mean, I remember because they opened both of those shows with Miami, and I remember hearing Miami for the first time ever, which was at those shows, and it's still one of my favorite songs. But you know how it is with a song. Sometimes you go to see a band in San Diego and they start singing, and then the song becomes about San Diego. They just put it into the lyrics. So at the time, you didn't know that, like, okay, this is an actual lyric from this song. Maybe he's going to just shut it down in Boulder when he's playing in Boulder. I don't know. So it was very, when I finally heard that album come out, a year later, it was. I just love Hard Candy, that album, and I think part of it was from seeing those shows, and just such a great experience. That was the same thing, Chris. Back when you're talking about, there was a sense of the unknown with those shows. So you would go 2 nights because you didn't know what you were going to get on that second night. The shows would be very different. The set list would be very different. Adam's mood would be different. It would all be different, and it was very much worth going because you weren't sort of seeing the movie a second time. Chris, I'm sorry, Eric. You still got to tell us your favorite show too.
Oh yeah, and I've
I
talked about this a little bit. And by the way, it's funny because when Chris mentions those shows, and he did it on a prior podcast, I said I knew those shows because I remember looking at the set lists. I think I was overseas, and I said, "Wow, they're playing some incredible deep cuts." I said, and I was thinking in my mind, like, how great would it be to go to multiple, like all three of those shows or whatever? And you said you went to all three, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah,
yeah. So that's amazing. Yeah, just to say, and I think again, this might have been something we mentioned before. I think I did, but when you said about Miami, that and I appreciate you, and I'll plug your book again. You actually, what I said, I saw them 19 times. A lot of them were for the Hard Candy College tour that you
Mm-hmm.
reference, and I
Mm-hmm.
haven't heard
Mm-hmm.
anybody else mention this because people almost forget about that tour because
Right.
literally it was like I think let's see, was that 2002? I mean, I was in my late 20s, I guess, but I felt like an uncle at those shows.
Right.
Because
Right.
some of them were at, like, one was at Messiah College in Pennsylvania. I mean, there's not
Yeah.
a lot of locals there. Now, I went to the one in Morgantown, West Virginia, that had a lot of locals. That's a pretty big town,
Yeah.
especially for West Virginia. But Messiah College, it was a lot of undergraduates and me, who they're like, oh, who's the professor or the graduate student? But I couldn't believe that Counting Crows was playing there. Now, it's funny, you even kind of hint at it the book, and there might have been some reasons to kind of capture, maybe that's just where they thought they could get booked. I think it was also to kind of capture younger fans. I think that was part of it too, with Hard Candy, which is a little poppy compared to some of the other albums. I'm not sure. And what was the reason you said in the book that they played a lot of those college shows, if you remember?
Well, I think part of it was that because they tour so much and they would play New York, 3 times in a year, that they were trying to look for ways to keep playing a lot, but not just do the same thing
Oh,
over
right,
and over.
right.
So they did the college tour, they did the wine, started adding wineries and sort of alternative venues,
Yep.
and I think also pairing, doing these sort of co-headlining tours, as they did so many times and have done so many times, was another strategy to sort of not just do the same thing, not just be the headliner playing the show again.
And so I just the reason I say that too is that on one of the first colleges I went to, as they played Miami, they were testing, or either testing it out or about to release. I guess that was in '01.
Yeah.
I was just making a list, and I also, like you, I said to Chris last time, like, me and my friend looked at each other and we're like, that's going to be an amazing song on the album, because that's the first time we heard it. It was just a great live song. The best show I went to was actually just last year, Geoff.
Wow.
I think I mentioned it before. The Manchester United Kingdom. I just thought the band was playing as a whole the best I've ever seen them. I was also second row in the middle, so that obviously has something to do
That
with it. I
helps.
snuck up, but and then the set list was really good. Of course, it was mostly set. The set list was set, but the kind of rotating songs that they put in were some of my favorites, which were "I Wish I Was a Girl," 1492, "Recovering the Satellites," and there was and "Come Around."
Hmm.
Playing those four songs was big to me. And guess what? You know what also made it great? The fans, I hate to say it, are so much better than the American fans. And then that got Adam to play even better. I swear when
Hmm.
he was doing
Hmm.
Bobby and the Rat Kings and the crowd was into it, near the end, I thought he was going to cry because he was just
Hmm.
having, and even Jim, um, drummer Jim Bojo, he even mentioned something about that show on his Facebook, and I think he even
Right.
showed the crowd at a certain part of one of the songs because they feed off that. They know if everybody's
Right.
just drunk and talking to their neighbors and not paying attention to the show and only being respectful during the big hits. So anyway, and it's a shame though. We talked about that actually. That show is not available on Nugs because it's overseas. Well, I don't know if there's a bootleg, but there are a few YouTube videos about it. Um,
Nice.
yeah, well, one thing I want to say, and I did meet them in one of the songs, "Somewhere Under Wonderland." That's the only time I did the meet and greet. And one thing that you
Yeah.
said in the book, which actually hit home to me, is I've known from Adam's interviews that, and clearly, even if you didn't listen to the interviews, if you listen to "Somewhere Under Wonderland," of course, musically it had a certain sound, but clearly it was one of the first times that, as you say in the book, he does talk about personal things. I mean, some of the things in "Somewhere in the Wonderland" are clearly based upon personal experiences, yet
Right.
he tries to write more from a third person. Okay. So a
Hmm.
little bit of me was a little bit critical of that because I guess at the time I thought, well, he's almost just trying to challenge himself a little bit, and that's
Right.
good, and I'm sure he's excited about that. But then is he doing it just for the sake of challenging themselves and taking away a little bit what we love? And I also want to hear his insights at age, maybe at the time he was in his 50s, I guess. Like, I want to kind of hear his
Hmm.
reflections on life. And he does this in Possibility Days and some other ones. But I was like, Jesus, is
Hmm.
he doing that? But one thing that you mentioned in the book, which I did not know, is even though it was clearly deliberate, part of it is that he's like, I'm kind of sick of sharing
Yeah.
some of my
Yeah.
personal stories. So that, and I understood that. So that kind of hit home and I appreciated that.
Yeah, oversharing, and I mean, I think in some ways it's interesting how this band's entire career has been a reaction to their first album. In some ways, it's like it really has, and I think that's true of Somewhere Under Wonderland too. It's always like, we know we have to respond to this. We know what you want, or the fans, or whatever. We know what we're willing to do, and we know what we're not willing to do. And so each album for them has created a challenge. And I do think Adam challenged himself to, after Saturday nights and Sunday mornings, he said, I'm overshared. I'm done. I've shared everything that I feel like sharing, and I want to write about other people now, and try a
yeah.
different strategy
And
as
it
a
puts,
writer. That's
yeah.
cool.
And it puts things in perspective. I mean, clearly, because I mean, I'm guessing both you know this, but for years, if people asked him his favorite, sorry, not his favorite song, what he thought his best song was, which I always disagreed, is he said "Long December" clearly, and he said that for decades, and then he replaced that with Palisades Park because that he had a challenge that he wanted these different shifts in
Right.
music throughout the course of
Right.
the, because probably it is the most, up until Sweet, most sophisticated, I guess, song, or probably one of the most difficult to write and still be a great song. So I get that. But then he said he kind of wanted to do the same thing in the Sweet, right? He wanted to take that idea of shifting the different parts of, putting it together in one song for Palisades Park and then doing it with the Sweet. So yeah, anyway,
Hmm.
it's good. But it is interesting that maybe this is not one of the last things, but one thing I did want to touch upon that I don't want it to be, I guess, negative because we all know I somewhat worship Adam and the rest of the band. And he would hate to hear that, but when we talk about touring versus studio albums, and again, he had mental issues and different setbacks, and of course dealing with fame. But could he have written more, right? We even said a lot of his, and you even mentioned it in the book. You have a line that like, "Oh, Adam doesn't like writing on the road," which, by the way, I totally get. That part I 100% get, and I also appreciate that he likes the structure of being on the road, and that forces him right to do something. Um, but how do I phrase this? Um, but could he have written more? And I guess there's part of me that thinks like when he is under the gun and when he has to, and I think of course people are different in their 20s and 30s, and there's even some academic research that says creative output peaks at 35 or something like that. I've read that somewhere. um, but like when he got pressure to write accidentally in love, he suddenly could do it.
Yeah.
And like, you know, when he decided to write the suite, so there's part of me, I don't want to say, I just think it's more, I think it's just mentally difficult for him, right? It takes so much work that he has to get the internal energy to do it. But when he actually forces himself to do it, he probably could have been more productive. You know, but it makes me think about philosophic issues like, do you just want to have as much output as possible, or if you get rich off a couple albums, should you just enjoy the rest of your life, right? What you know, because I get that too, right? And sometimes he did talk about that, right? That he just wants to relax and enjoy his life a little more. And I remember him writing about going to Broadway more, and he's like, I just want to enjoy New York. I live in New York. I have funds. I don't have kids. I don't know. It just gets me thinking about these issues. What do you both of you think about that?
I'm go ahead. Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think it is part of, I think, the story that there's he's someone who forced himself, I think, at times to be creative. Even I think you had Geoff, you did a good job of describing the process of writing, even like recovering the satellites, and how sort of arduous that was for him. Even at that early stage, he's really fighting and trying to get stuff out and like throwing stuff away that a lot of other people would say were good songs. Um, you know, and so there's that thing where it's always kind of been a struggle. And then you do get to that certain point where, yeah, as things start to decline, and if 35, right, he would have hit that somewhere in the late 90s. And maybe, yeah, he's kind of been up against that going back a ways. And we've seen that over the last 20 years and what we've actually gotten in terms of recorded output. Doesn't make what's good less good, but that there's just
Right.
less new stuff coming out of him over that time period.
Mm-hmm.
I find that Adam is someone that generally, I mean, everybody contradicts themselves a little bit. And I think creative people tend to, right, because they're thinking different things. And generally, I find that Adam is someone that does not contradict himself, which I appreciate. Maybe one exception to that, which I got from the book, is whether maybe this comes back to, do I want to be a rock and roll star? But part of it is like what you said. Hey, I'm just going to create a suite. If people like it, they like it. I just want to do what I want to do. And then there are times that he referenced maybe, well, we're not in the zeitgeist anymore. We're not, but there's part of that a little bit he kind of still wanted to be, because he also said about Somewhere Under Wonderland that he was actually like, it kind of turned him off from writing albums because it didn't sell. Like, he's like, this is some of my best stuff, and not enough people appreciated that. Well, that kind of contradicts, you know, the fact of just doing it for doing it. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I get both sides, and probably he has both opinions, so I understand that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just found it to be interesting.
There's also like, he doesn't have he's a McCartney without a Lennon, he's a Mick Jagger without a Keith Richards. There is no counterpart to him in the band as there are in some of the great bands, not all of them. He's much more of like a Tom Petty or a Bruce Springsteen, where he's kind of at the center of things and everyone's there to support his artistic vision. But I think as a writer, that creates a new, set of challenges, because you don't have that counterpart, who's maybe not, they're having a hot moment with their writing. They bring you in, I think those collaborations are always interesting. And, he's, I mean, he is the real center of musical gravity in that group. He writes all the lyrics and most of the music. And so there's a unique pressure on him, I think. I will say that study found that writers peak much later. So as a
Oh,
writer,
okay.
he should be able to go, I think it's into his 80s or 90s.
Okay.
And continue to improve. But also, I was very impressed in writing the book how he was able to, at various junctures, sort of write to, spec, or, when they said, okay, you're going to do Accidentally in Love, he nailed it. I mean, he wrote he nailed that song.
Absolutely.
I think he was kind of deliberate about writing "Hanging Around," which is maybe not one of my favorite songs, but I think he had a goal with that song that he accomplished. He had a home run in terms of what he wanted to do strategically as a writer. He accomplished, and I really respect that about him too, because I think you see I saw that as a continual thread that I didn't pick up on until I wrote the book. But it impressed me, his ability to do that.
Yeah. And he did set goals, right? I mean, that's for each record. Right. You can find the quotes where he's like, Hard Candy is going to be a pop record. I'm going to write it like this. These songs are going to sound like this. And there's a lot of wonderful songs in that record that do fit that theme. I mean, there is a real theme to that record, and to a lot of the records, if you kind of look back and go, oh yeah, that's why they sound different, is in part because he was trying to write a different kind of record and succeeded in large part.
Yeah, Geoff, what I was talking about, it reminds me, for those listening to the podcast, I'll probably say it a lot, and it's definitely a distant number two, but my number two band is the Smashing Pumpkins, and I see a lot of similarities, not in the music necessarily, although a little bit kind of that they want to mix the guitar rock with some softer things and experimentation, but more about their personalities. I think they're kind of different sides of the same coin. And I don't know if either of them would appreciate that. And I always wanted to know what they thought of each other's music. But
Adam loves Broadway. Billy Corgan loves professional wrestling. It's two sides of the same coin.
That's right.
And I really mean that, but that's
no, you're right.
Corgan's somebody who's just willing to go to the ends of the earth, to adhere to his artistic vision in a way.
Exactly.
It's insane. Like, he doesn't care if there's one person or nobody left in the audience that night at the end of the show. He's still playing the songs he wanted to play. And, you
recently, in the last couple years, same with Adam, a little more of their greatest hits. That he has pivoted a little bit in the last 4 years, which is interesting to me. And maybe he thinks that's also a way to get people in the stands and then show some music. But what got me thinking is he's the opposite in some ways too, where he just produces, he releases as much as possible. They have 15, I forget the count now, but he just so Smashing Pumpkins just released a triple album. So he's released more in the last 5 years. I want to say if you count that as 3, and then another one was a double. He's released more in the last than Counting Crows have forever. And he also has put a ton in the band. But the line that gets me is which I understand, Adam, and it's kind of changed when he said about the no children, about why he doesn't have children. I know in the past he said he was kind of worried about passing off his mental illness to children. But he also said he put it all on the band. Now, Billy kind of did the same thing, and just in the last couple years had 2 children. Now he's still on tour all the time. Now he waited until he was close to 50 or whatever, but he had to. But anyway, it just got me. I don't know. I just made the comparison. Just one last, totally not going to say last, but one random thing I wanted to ask, and because I've taken this from your book and Adam's interviews, and it's such a something that was very decade specific, or I guess it crosses on 2 decades, which is that This Desert Life and Kid Things. On This Desert Life, Kid Things on The Desert Life, and Big Yellow Taxi on Hard Candy were both hidden tracks. Yeah. And Adam talks about how those hidden, and that was such a thing of that decade, right? To have a hidden track. I know Dave Matthews, I know a bunch of bands did it. But it got me thinking that I think Adam has also hinted that they were both major decisions in a way, because, okay, so I had Kid Things as I think the thing with maybe you can correct me, having Kid Things as a bonus track made it so I think it was Baby I'm a Big Star Now was then totally omitted, because that also might have been a hidden track, but they already had one. And then Big Yellow Taxi they threw on as a fun hidden track, but then in retrospect, Adam said, I would probably sold 1 million more albums if we had it as a regular track. And then later they reissued it with a regular track, but it kind of missed that opportunity. Any thoughts about hidden tracks, Geoff, with your research? Or
and there was, when they replaced it, Big Yellow Taxi, it was with the Vanessa Carlton version. So,
the different version. Yes,
literally, they took their song, had somebody add her vocals to it, and then put it on their album. You had to wonder kind of what they thought about it. Yeah, very much of the era. The REM had hidden tracks. And sorry, Chris.
Although I was saying that with the Vanessa Carlton thing, there's a famous. They met at some point, in New York and they were just like, oh, we sing together.
Right.
Like,
Yeah,
because they had
exactly.
just met each other. And
Never
then
met. Yeah.
she showed up to one of I think it's the San Francisco shows in 2003. And they did that song together. And I think did 1,000 Miles together as well, with Adam singing backing vocals. And it's quite good. But
I
and then
bet.
that never happened again. But yeah, they literally met and were like, hi, we're on a very popular record together.
Right.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, right. And the video, yeah, it is interesting how that happens.
You're reminding me, Chris, right? On Hard Candy, actually, the hidden track version is not the Vanessa Carlton version, right? Or
Right, exactly. The hidden track
right,
version is without. It's sort of from when they were doing a bunch of covers.
right. See, yeah, because I hadn't listened to that. I've had listened to Hard Candy recently, but I actually haven't made it all the way to the hidden track recently. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So initially, when the album came out, it was the Counting Crows cover of that song. Later, the producer, Vanessa Carlton's producer, had her add her vocals to it, and they released it on a soundtrack, and it became Counting Crows with Vanessa Carlton, which they hadn't really collaborated, but they put it out. Then Geffen, when it became a hit, reissued Hard Candy with the new version on Hard Candy. So they replaced the original version of Counting Crows only with the new version of Vanessa Carlton, and I believe listed it on the album after that. So it became no longer a hidden track.
An uncovered track.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give too many details about it, so people buy the book. And again, I love the book. Is that one thing I did appreciate is you spending time talking about the movie he produced, the comedy movie, or he was the co-producer, and this play. And because I forgot about the play that he was working on, the musical, which I guess those songs are not released, right? Like, because they're probably amazing songs, I'm guessing.
Unless there is a count, there's a versions of Goodnight Elizabeth that have an alt that talks about a black sun, which we know the play is called Black Sun, so theoretically that could be related to that, although no one's ever, I think, confirmed or denied that has anything to do with that.
Okay.
He used Chelsea as one of the songs he was using in Black Sun, and there's another one. It's in the book. I can't remember which song, but there's a second one. Also, maybe it was Good Luck or something that he was going to use in there too.
Is Good Luck? Is that the one that you said in the book was also similar to Chelsea? Is that Good Luck that you? Yeah, right.
And also, Good Luck was written during the Recovering the Satellites writing period, and to me, it seems like he had earmarked that song as the sort of big ballad for Recovering the Satellites. Subsequently, he wrote Long December, and musically they're quite similar. I think he decided Long December was, sort of the culmination of this ballad he had been working on that began as Good Luck. I would love to hear him release, that song. It's incredible.
Yeah. Because I will say that is the one album. Recovering the Satellites is, I think, the one record of theirs, right? I think there's enough on the cutting room floor where you're like, I'd really like the deluxe edition of that one. And he said, I think at some point recently, that they may have found the old tapes or something. Yeah, which would be amazing if that's actually true, because that would be. I'd love a re-release of that one, because there's a lot of stuff on Suffocate and
Yeah, right. Have you ever seen the video footage from the Ford Theater that was shot for I think it's the whole concert, and the documentary that was shot at the house during Recovering the Satellites?
A bunch of the Ford Theater stuff was circulating. I don't know if it was the whole concert. It might have been like a part of it. The doc
on YouTube
is really good,
years ago. It's amazing. Yeah, it was on YouTube years ago, and it's disappeared. So I think that's part of they disappeared it because they're planning to release it. I think because documentary and that concert, incredible footage. And Adam has said we don't. They have the tapes have been destroyed, and hopefully they found them. But that they tons of video footage from Recovering. So I'd love to see that.
Right. Well, and also again, obviously, storytellers. As someone who's put a lot of Counting Crows video footage up on YouTube, they do not want storytellers up there, or whoever is representing them does not want storytellers up there. Right. And I have noticed at times things get disappeared and then and then they get released. Right. The 2 meter set, some of the Amsterdam stuff got disappeared on me, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess someone was enforcing it, and then it's not much longer that showed up on Amazon's Coda collection, they call it, but there's a bunch of those set, and the 2 Counting Crows ones are on there if you're ever looking for
they're
something
great.
For an Amazon.
Yeah,
they're terrific, and especially the yeah.
Suddenly there's a bunch of Counting Crows concerts on Amazon that weren't there even. Yeah, I mean, I've seen them before, but suddenly they're available again. It's like, ooh, fun. So,
Well, there's also there's that app Quello or I don't know how you say it, but it's the
one of
Q.
those, yeah.
And they had put up a 2008 show from a UK festival, I think the Wireless Festival, that
Yep.
I had actually, and I don't say this to, but I've hawked and gone after this stuff, and that came up, and I was like, I have never seen this footage before. Certainly not a whole show of it,
It's
which is
good,
pretty
yeah.
amazing to finally find a fresh show from 15 years ago, and a good one, a real good one. They're in fine form on that one.
Good tour, yeah.
One thing I want to ask you about, Geoff, is sort of the construction of the book. The one thought I thought was interesting was that I felt like in putting in a lot of the writing about the band, especially in the 2000s, it kind of gives air to a lot of the critics of the band, right? The people who kind of go to review a Counting Crows concert and are like, "Why the hell is this guy doing this? What on earth is going on?"
Right.
And I was curious about sort of the mindset there, and you know why it's in because it cuts both ways to me. On the one hand, you do want to hear all the perspectives. At the same time, there is a sense that they became a band that kind of didn't care or wasn't aiming for those people. If you were walking off the street and writing about Counting Crows, there was a good chance they were going to hate this.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think part of it was that I was sort of looking for the patterns. This is Eric and I going into our sociological training where we're looking for patterns, and the patterns that I saw in my sort of informal content analysis of those articles and newspaper stories that came out was that early on the band was just very critically lauded, almost to the point of absurdity, where they were talking, just extolling all the books he had read, and it was just almost like ridiculous how fawning the press was about him in some of these big outlets too. Then later, it was interesting to see how the New York Times, Rolling Stone, some of these outlets that were just so reverent, they turned on him almost, and I thought their attacks were very personal in some ways that were surprising to me. I remember telling my wife, like, they're really being very personal in these attacks, and she's like, yeah, okay, welcome to my world. This is the women have had to deal with these, talks about their looks and all this stuff for years, and so he's certainly not fair game, to this sort of, celebrity bashing that they do. So I wanted to show how the critical trajectory of the band changed, how
Gotcha.
They went from being revered in New York Times and lauded and esteemed as almost poets, to being just really like, almost insulted as corporate hacks and all this kind of stuff. And so I was trying to show that and also be honest about how that changed. But at the same time, continually throughout the book, I'm trying to point out the places where I think they made good decisions or good artistic choices. Certainly it's not just, bashing them. And sometimes I say critics got it wrong, like the 2007 tour, I think, where they had really revitalized themselves. The critics were bashing it. And I'm like, no, the critics were just wrong about this. They missed it.
They're wrong about that one. Yeah.
Yeah, they missed it. And so there's sometimes where I just say, the critics were saying this, but they overlooked, what was really happening. So
yeah,
I try to be honest about that. I didn't want it to be a fanboy thing where I'm just like, oh my God, everything they've ever done is amazing, from the very first song to the very last song, that's all 10 out of 10s, because nobody takes that seriously. And also, I know that the fans, even the big fans, even the hardcore fans like you guys, are critical also, critical meaning thoughtful, not just bashing them and being critical, but we love to play this parlor game, whether it's the Beatles or any great band, about, oh yeah, the Beatles have songs that I don't like, or whole albums, oh my God, that I don't love, and other ones that I think are just incredible. So to me, Counting Crows belong as part of that conversation. They're so good that they can certainly handle a bit of criticism. I think my favorite album by them is probably Hard Candy, which is an album that to me has some of their worst songs on it, but the highs are so high that I don't care,
Okay,
I skip them.
Geoff, I was literally just about to tease you. I had that on my list for today, which is that I'm glad that you mentioned 45 minutes ago that Hard Candy was probably your favorite album, because
Yeah.
you have a line in your book that says, "Well, like, this is great," but then some of the middle of the album, which I want to tease
Yeah.
you, but
Yeah.
you said maudlin mid-tempo sludge,
Right.
which because I guess and I agree with you maybe on one of the songs, but I kind of like some of the others. But I understand your point about some of those kind of experimental songs, if you will, at least two
Yeah.
of them, right? New Frontier
We'll
and
definitely bring you back to Rank,
the Hard
Hard
Candy
Candy, and
album.
we'll
Yeah.
definitely. I
Well.
want to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I know that when the fans of the Counting Crows read, that I don't like this song or that song, they're going to take issue with that, because I know for some people that might be their very favorite song, and they think I have no idea what I'm talking about. But part of the fun of loving a band like Counting Crows is having these sort of conversations about, even like somebody like Bob Dylan. It's like, man, he's made some terrible left turns in his career. He's a genius, but my God, what was he thinking? At certain points. And those are fun conversations if you're a music geek like me to have. And I love that Counting Crows are certainly have always been part of that conversation for me.
Oh, and I love that. I had no idea. I knew that he was trying to experiment, but for example, I actually didn't know, referencing New Frontier, that when you talk about the origins of the band, that some of them wanted to play around in that new wave sound a little bit. So I
Oh
actually
yeah.
now see that as a tribute, or I just thought that Adam wanted to challenge himself, right? Because Adam likes to challenge, like, you know what, let's make a new wave song. I didn't realize that there were some origins to that. So that's where your book came in. But
Yeah.
hey, before I forget, oh yeah, please,
Let's say this.
Chris.
Good to Jeff's point before about the sort of peaks and valleys of the band, which I do think it is something that this band has hit such interesting highs at times. I do think I find in conversations, people do sort of struggle with the concept of how up and down at points they've been. You tend to find
Mm-hmm.
people will say things like, "Oh man, remember when they used to always play like 25 songs?" And you're like, "No, the math does not check out on that.
Right.
That is wrong." Like, even if you're
Right.
looking at that, like the 2001 shows you'll do, they played for 2 hours. They're great shows, but they played 18 songs each night, and they're not.
Yep.
It's just not always true. And the
Yeah.
times where people, oh, there was always different every night. I'm like, not always. Not if you look, there's some peaks and there where things are going up in terms of that, and there's also
Yeah.
some times where things go down. But yeah, I also think you're right that there is something about being a fan of this band because of the way that people responded to them in the 2000s, where people were like, "Oh, you like the band with the fat guy with the stupid hair?" And you're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hey,
Yeah.
hey, hey,
Yeah.
whoa,
What?
are you insulting me?"
What?
Because and I think it's interesting because I think you're right that the fans of the band, maybe because of that time period, tend to take the criticisms a little personally, because
Right.
people were insulting Adam in such a sort of personal way that they're like, it almost became like, wait a minute, you mean I'm an asshole for liking these songs? And there is kind of an interesting journey maybe of the fans of the band because of that thing that happened to the band, where it went from being a thing that everyone was supposed to like to, how dare you like that if you're a serious music fan? You're like, no, what are you talking about?
I think the reason there hasn't been a book about Counting Crows is the hipster critics are too embarrassed to put their name on a book like this. You fools.
Yeah,
And,
no, you're right. It makes me more defensive, and you're right about the personal attacks. And again, I know that Adam gets so, and so do I, when he'll get interviewed even to this day, and someone say, "Oh, so you dated two of the Friends people,"
Right.
and then inevitably, not only that, but then you get all these online comments like, "How could that guy get those
Right.
girls? That just shows you if you be a rock star, you could get." And listen, I'm not saying that Adam, was going to end up as a male supermodel instead of a singer. But I love when people, but it just shows you how defensive I am about stuff like that. Not only is it a personal attack, like both of you said, that's kind of unnecessary, maybe in some ways human nature for hipster snarks, but also his sister and a lot of people have said, like, Adam was always, now he always references, "Oh, I could get more women," and Mr. Jones, I couldn't, that's what it was about. I couldn't get the pretty girl. But then Adam's sister and a bunch of other people said, "No, he always had that charm." Like, of
Yeah.
course, that's part of his thing. And he had these deep meanings. I mean, these deep lyrics come from things that also women like, right? When you're this deeper kind of
Mm-hmm.
introspective
Mm-hmm.
personality. I say the same thing again about, like, Billy Corgan in a way or whatever. And by
Mm-hmm.
the way, I think you said in your book, and this is the one I almost was going to end with this, but maybe we have a couple more things to talk about. is the one line that you had that I think was actually the most revealing in a kind of a jokey way, that either he hinted or he said that he never cheated on, that was part of I Wish I Was a Girl, that he never cheated on any of his girlfriends. And I almost laughed at, I'm like, really? Never? Now again, maybe 90% you were the good boy, but I'm just trying to imagine, out of all the songs about women and introspection and sex
Yeah.
drive and all this kind
Yeah.
of stuff, that and going, and even joked about how being a rock star at concerts, allowed him some, maybe some
Hmm.
good opportunities. But anyway, that just made me laugh. Not that I want to know, but I was like, really? If it is, I'm
Yeah.
really impressed. If not, then I understand too. So
Yeah, right. Well, so people try to, always want to make themselves look good, and he's somebody who's. It's true. He gets asked these weird questions about his dating life and stuff. And in some ways, I tried to steer fairly clear of that material in the book. Although sometimes I felt like it was important because it impacted the writing of the music that he was doing, and
yes,
I felt
yes.
like I needed to at some points bring it in, but I didn't, like, oh, I'm going to list every single person he ever dated and try to get, to me, it was just like, I wasn't interested. But a question I wanted to ask both you guys, and
Mm.
maybe I'm opening a can of worms here at the 11th hour, but, to me, it's something that's interesting about Counting Crows is how, we as fans respond to their music. And so my fandom, I think, of the band has changed over the years as I've changed. And
Mm.
some big part of that was becoming a father and getting married. When I was in my 20s, I related to Counting Crows music so much, partially
Hmm.
because I was in those relationships where you're up at 3 a.m, and trying to figure it all out and all that kind of stuff. But now that I've been very happily married for like 13 years and I have kids and all that kind of stuff, like I don't connect to those songs in the same way. And I mean, maybe Eric, you were making this point earlier, but I don't hear Adam writing songs that speak to my, sort of experience in life now as much as he spoke to them earlier. And I feel like partially it's because I have grown and changed in some ways that he hasn't. Like he hasn't become a father, he never got married, and those things are, as very significant and hugely sort of changing to a person. So I just wondered. I guess I wonder about it's not so much that the Counting Crows have fallen off or whatever. It's just that my life has changed and I don't relate to their music so much because it to me there hasn't been a lot of it, but to me it's like I don't relate to Possibility Days or something like that personally. I get it, but that song doesn't speak to me on a personal level.
Oh,
You know?
that's that's funny because I yes and no, right? That's what I was getting at with Somewhere Under Wonderland. Now, I will say, and I actually said this in an earlier podcast when we get to it, even though I was older, I still related to Saturday night, Sunday mornings because I was going through the exact same breakdown at the time, and I thought I was
Right.
kind of losing my mind.
Yeah.
And so I totally got that, and I had ties to New York City with Washington Square and everything. So,
Love it.
so I get that. Yeah, it's funny because I actually think Possibility Days and God of Ocean Tides are okay. So obviously not having lyrics about kids. Although I told Chris in the one podcast, I think it was about August and Everything After. I said some of the, oh no, off the record, we said some of those songs about love you can actually also substitute children in there if you think about it.
Mm,
And we used the
Mm.
line for Anna Begins where we said like every time she's sneezing, I believe it's love, and
yeah.
I'm not ready for these sort of things. Well, that's what you
Mm,
can say when you're holding a baby,
yeah.
right? Because that's
Yeah.
exactly what happens. But it's interesting because I actually think we'll talk about this when we get to the album. I think Possibility Days and God of Ocean Tides and a couple songs on there are some of the few that he is talking about like 20 something love, but he is looking at it, I think, from, I don't know,
Like a distance.
yeah, or decades past.
Mm,
And even if he
Yeah.
doesn't have children, it would be neat to talk to him about the reflection of the decades and also that we're getting closer to death and mortality. And I
mm-hmm.
think Possibility Days hints at that a little bit when he talks about the burden of all of our days and how that kind of sticks with you, at least for me. And Buttersweet, but you're right, Elvis went to Hollywood that was so abstract that, and I love actually parts of that song, but the lyrics are so abstract and a little, I don't say out there, but you know what I mean? And that was on purpose, right? Of some of the kind of imagery and things that, yes, you're not going to have that personal connection. A little bit Buttersweet Miracle because I can, because one of the songs is about being in the band, right? And one of them is
Yeah.
about being a fan of the band.
Yeah.
So those I can still relate to. But absolutely, yeah, I'd like to see a little more, because even All My Friends, one great thing about All My Friends, and if you see in about the video, is that he's basically talking about how he's a certain age and his friends are having children and kind of moving on, and he's
Mhm.
not. And I think he could do a more up to date version of that too, about being at the age he is now. Chris, do
Yeah,
you have a
but I
comment?
do think part of it is that stuff like Somewhere Under Wonderland and the Butter Miracle Suite are smart reactions to, I think, the criticism you'd make, in that they are not about whatever Adam's dating life has been like over that period, with maybe
It's
the
true.
exception of a couple of
Yeah.
small things there. Whereas there are other artists that have kind of continued to mine that well, where I'm like, I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry it didn't work out for the 50th time with the girl, but
Right. Right.
this song was better when I heard it 15 years ago, and I kind of
Yes.
believed it a little bit more,
Right.
because after this, maybe you need some personal reflection. Maybe
Yeah.
that would be helpful, as opposed to writing another song about how the girl left you and it's so sucky.
Yeah.
So I do think, again, I think he's tried to grow and evolve with that, and maybe I wouldn't put either of those two albums up as, I wouldn't label them their best.
Mhm.
But I do think he tried to evolve the writing in a way that isn't so focused on, like, oh yeah, I'm just still a guy out in the town.
True.
And maybe it's helped. I mean, I think he's been in a relationship for several years now. I
I
don't
think
really
so.
track that enough. I just know enough to know that he seems to be talking about the same person still
And
after many years. So it seems
I
like
think so too. Yeah.
he's sort of a little bit starting to mature on that front. But I think, yeah, no, it's a good point though. I think
That's a good point.
these bands are, this is a band that does kind of touch a certain feeling that tends to, I think, really connect with someone in their 20s and 30s, right? The feeling of, like, particularly the early 20s, right? There's a reason why why it was perfect to tour colleges with Counting
Right.
Crows, because
Yeah.
this is music for people who are feeling all the feelings. And,
Yeah.
if you're
Right.
21, 22, 23, this is music for you. And we can all kind of, as we get older, it still reflects, it still hits us. But yeah, the intensity of that feeling, I was just listening to a show before, and there's the line in Come Around about, you know, um, I've seen what she thinks is love, and it leaves me laughing. And I'm like, yeah. I think I would have heard that for the first time I was 24 or 25, and I was like, yeah. And now I'm like,
Right.
yeah, it still makes me feel that way, but I'm not angry about someone's concept on love quite the same way that I was when I was 25.
Although it's funny with that song, even yeah, when that song came out, I had a bit of a disagreement with one of my best friends, and but we both kind of said, oh, let's get a male friend. We said, oh, we'll just take a break, but we knew we were going to come back to being good friends again. We just kind of needed to take a little break. So in that case, even though I know it was
You
about them
gender
and the
swapped
band,
it.
I gender swapped it, and I said, we'll still come around. We have too much history not to. But your point, by the way, Geoff, is actually a theme in our when this podcast is said and done. I think that's going to be the theme, that it's actually a coming of age band, and maybe the best coming of age band, of course, partly because that's part of what their stories are about, coming of age and figuring out yourself, and then reacting to things that either happened or didn't happen. And I actually mentioned that to Dan when I met him at the Troubadour, and he was kind of laughing about the podcast and why there's some obsessive fans. And I was like, part of it was the timing, that it was these personal stories at a time when you're really focused on the person. And of course the music's incredible too, and the lyrics, and the band is unbelievable and all that. So, yep.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to also defend Possibility Days as just, I want to make clear, I think it's maybe the best song on that album. I love it. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I just meant that they can have a song that I think is just absolutely like a 10 out of 10 song, but I don't connect with the lyrics or like the meaning of the song the way that I might have before. And I wonder, I guess my point is that seems to be more about me than it does about them, because that's a great song. It's just, I'm at a point in my life where it doesn't feel as personal to me or something.
Right, you didn't have your
Yeah.
first kiss with a girl recently, and then she flew back to London, right? Where there's some kind of disagreement about no, because you're seeing the same person every day and whatever. So,
Actually, Eric, a funny story. No, I'm kidding.
yeah.
Well,
But
yeah, like, it's a combination of the two, right? Because the songs are a little bit more abstract, right? I mean,
Yep.
try to. I know what God of Ocean Tides is about, but really, God of Ocean Tides could be about a lot. I mean, it's
Yeah,
a fairly abstract conceptual thing
another great
until
one.
actually, it's kind of interesting. I feel like on some of the recent records, he always said, "I resist kind of giving you these details." But some of the songs that I feel like I understand the best in the recent records are the ones where he explains, like, no, like, I'm on a bus, I'm doing these things hit, and you're like, oh, I understand God of Ocean Tides now because I
Yeah.
understand the aspect of sort of leaving people behind and that feeling. Or the same with Tall Grass, where you're like, the person taking a train to he's in a place in London. She is his girlfriend. She takes a train to Paris, and that leaves him alone. And you're like, and that helps you kind of into a song that is otherwise fairly abstract about certain feelings and the process and art and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting. Again, talk about the contradictions and the sort of the journey that he's gone under, where he's always resisted those details, and now he's kind of sometimes maybe having to give those details because the songs used to have all the details in them. It used to be like, who's Anna? Well, her name was Anna. And
right.
well, thanks for bringing that up, actually, because tall. And by the way, Geoff, that's what I said. I know that part. I know I'm not the only one, and part of it, of course, is in my own mind. But I was in the UK last year, shortly after Butter Miracle, and I'm taking trains, and I'm seeing the grass plains of the UK, and then I'm following them around the UK, kind of what he's talking about in Bobby and the Rat Kings. That
Right.
you have some almost groupie, and so it was funny. But but even that song in Tall Grass, I thought one line when you were talking about, which I actually totally agree with you about what you said about relating to certain parts because now you're middle aged or whatever. But even his line where he's talking about some of the innocence gone, right? And then we don't know why. Right? Once you lose that innocence, I guess in a way I was buying. That's not from a 20-year-old saying that. That's from somebody maybe in middle age thinking back to things that happened in their childhood and how that changed maybe the trajectory of their life or whatever. Anyway, I
Well,
even think the thing about birthday cakes with God of Ocean's Tides, right? Or candle wax on paper plates a little bit. Anyway.
I guess my point was that Adam did such an incredible job of articulating all the feelings, as Chris said, of being in your
Yeah.
20s. I would just love him as an artist at his age now to do something that spoke about his experience of life at this age and looking back and what it's like. And, that could speak to me on that same level, just because
Yeah.
we've both grown. I've grown and he's grown. So as an artist, I wish he still had the ability to say something to me that, was as impactful as those things that I was hearing at a different age. I don't say this as a criticism of the Counting Crows. I say it as more of a thinking about what it means to be a fan of music and a lifelong listener of an artist.
part of it is, though, I think as I get older, I tend to connect more with people who are writing songs and are basically the same age as me.
Right?
It used to be, it was sort of like, oh, these kind of older brother types, right? When Adam Duritz is significantly older than me. I guess he'd be like my uncle or something. But that kind of thing. And now as I reach sort of, I started seeing in my mid 30s, people starting to write things about what it's like to be, going through the same sort of stuff. Part of it is that they're writing now with enough reflectiveness because my favorite artists happen to be around the same age as me.
Right.
And that sort of works for me better than, like, I don't know exactly what I'm always willing to listen, but I'm not sure exactly if Adam would have as much to say to me as certain other, records that have really spoken to me over the last 5 years. Strand of Oaks, Eraserland, Andrew Bryant's Private Window. There's a lot of stuff that, and I don't want to like just name records, but like stuff where I'm like, oh yeah, we're basically, the same age, and they're talking to me as if we're just friends, essentially, kind of.
I was thinking about your comment, Geoff, and that somehow it's really genius, and I'm not even sure why. And we'll get into this when we get into the actual deep dive on Recovering the Satellites. But how some of those songs, and particularly I'm thinking Recovering the Satellites, but maybe also Have You, to a lesser extent, Have You Seen Me Lately, and some of those, how they're about his celebrity, which none of us can relate to.
Right.
Yet Recovering the Satellites seems so relatable. And I
Mm,
am
mm,
not even able to put my, now, Have You Seen Me Lately, I kind of get, because like, oh, have you seen me lately? I'm changed from what I was a couple years ago or whatever, even
yeah.
if you're not on the radio.
Yeah.
But something like Recovering the Satellites, I don't know why that hits so well, even though in some ways it has nothing to do with anything that we've gone through. But it feels
Mm,
like it does. So anyway,
I think that
um,
record feels particularly fresh in a pandemic, in
yeah,
a
yeah.
COVID influence world. I
It
think
will.
the
mhm.
feeling of disconnection. I actually think they absolutely should re-release that record, because I think a lot of people would rediscover and love that record in 2023, because it's just, I think it is quite on point.
Can I mention on the New Orleans show? I know we might have some final, but again, we've been talking. And don't forget, you can download the bootlegs of this on Crowstown, and I'll put the link on the description again if you're interested. And we like to have our guests listen to some of their classic shows. But one thing that struck me so hard on listening to those shows that you went to, Geoff, was that the crowd was singing along to the lyrics of Recovering the Satellites, which
Mm,
was not even a single, and it's not like a catchy poppy song
mhm.
from the album Recovering the Satellites. And I was blown away. I mean, can you imagine going now with thousands of people and then the whole crowd like, get back to basic? Like, it would never happen. Like, maybe 12 of us know those, or, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I don't know if that struck me. I mean, besides mentioning New Orleans and Miami, that really struck me about how big they were and how many people had that album, and even a non-single, they knew the lyrics and wanted to sing it back to Adam.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I was also listening to those shows, and like, obviously it's a song that's more known, but the crowds singing along to Omaha and Rain King, I mean, you could just hear it sort of coming through the speakers. That show, the second show, I mean, one thing, because I didn't talk much about these New Orleans shows, and I apologize. Our conversation's been so interesting and free flowing. But those shows, one thing that I noticed in the liner notes they talked about, night one, one of the most amazing shows they ever played. What I remember is driving all that way and going and seeing night one, and at the end of the night going, did I just drive 1,000 miles for nothing? I don't want to say nothing. No, I don't want to say nothing, but like, was that worth driving 1,000 miles for that show? I'm not so sure. And then the next night, I went back, and it was like, I looked at my friend right after they played Anna Begins, which was the second song, maybe even at the beginning. And we looked at each other, and I just went, oh, wow, it's going to be one of those nights tonight. And that second show, I think that's the second best show I've seen them play, that second night in New Orleans. There's something about a band when they're on the road and touring and they stop at a town and they don't have to travel, and they get to be there for a couple of days. There's something about that second night. They didn't have to do a sound check, setup, tear down, all that kind of stuff. So they had a much easier day. And of course, they love New Orleans, so they're much more relaxed. They don't have to work as hard. They have more fun. It's so funny that second show, Adam comes out. I forgot about this, but he talks about how full he is because he had eaten this giant like New Orleans meal right before that, and of course, we could all relate too because we're in New Orleans, all eating all the New Orleans food too. But just how much fun those shows were, and how personable he was, how personal the shows felt. I was struck by that, having seen them this year. And then going and listening to those shows, it's like, wow, this was, so personal, and all felt so intimate. It all, he was, the things that he talked about, and just talking about being full and everything. He was just so funny. And but I do
And that's what
remember,
I was. No, I
yeah,
was saying that's what I was getting at about him and the women. I mean, he's a bit being charming and open, and that's what I
yeah,
said. This is a really he. Even if he wasn't a rock star, he would be a very charming and likable and
yes,
intense. Yes, does he get moody and stuff? Yes, and he's allowed to be a little more moody as a rock
yeah,
star.
yeah.
But that's part of what why we like them. Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway.
So great shows. And especially, I'll tell you, I mean, even though I know people like night one, night two was something special. That was a very special show. And you could tell from the minute they started, it was just like, there's something going on tonight where these guys are about to bring it. And that show, even if the set list, you may not like it as much or whatever, it's like, man, I don't know what it was, but they were in an extra gear that night for sure. It's a great show.
Well,
He's not someone who's ever had a poker face about playing. Like it's and I think
right.
as he's gotten older, he's gotten a little bit more consistent. But sometimes that's the beauty of some of those earlier shows is you're like, oh, he's in a good mood tonight, and it's very obvious what kind of mood he's in, and that's going to influence the show. I did think it was interesting, like that. You know, they're 2 nights in a row. They're very different shows, but at the same time, they don't change. They only change about a third of the set. Again, we always think about these like glory days, but it's only 6 songs, I think, in each of them that are different, in part because they play so much of Hard Candy, which again, that's part of it is like you're hearing those songs for the first time. So
right.
You've heard them for the second time and you're like, well, I guess I could go for that again. I I really liked that one. I haven't heard it before. But also just the depth of the alts in those songs. Where he is going all sorts of different places.
Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're our we're gonna need expertise for us, right? That Geoff's the historian, and you're the concert and Crowstown bootleg expert, and I'm more of maybe the studio album.
You're the looks
lyric
guy.
Lyric guy. What'd you say? I'm the what?
I said you're the looks guy, and you're the looks and charm,
I can
man.
Looks, Adam's looks and my charm. But what really struck me, just because you were mentioning the alts, and I thought this was a good point to mention, and you could correct me on this, that the Have You Seen Me Lately seemed really unique to me because it was a mix of the acoustic and electric in the same song.
Yeah, there's periods where they've done that. But yeah, this is sort of that the time period where they've kind of taken the two arrangements of the songs and kind of pushed them together, which I had a note that I was like, oh man, I love this version. I actually can't remember how frequently they played this one, but this is that sort of era. Same kind of with Mr. Jones, where you're sort of playing something between the acoustic and sort of full electric version. It's kind of somewhere in the middle.
And he would even start with
So you want to be a rock and roll star?
Yeah, exactly. Is this also Counting Crows trivia? I never knew before that the one song that they on the set list was called Insomnia is either Up All Night. Is Up All Night, which also is called Frankie Goes
Miller Goes to Hollywood. Frankie Miller
so the only Counting Crow song that I know of that has 3 titles.
3 different names.
Okay, thank you. That was a little bit of trivia I did not know.
Someone named because Richard Manuel is dead. Everyone correctly gets is called Richard Manuel is dead. Even at this stage, right. They're like, oh, he says Richard Manuel is dead, and right there, and you go, oh, that's clearly the name of it.
Yeah, I also thought that was a great version of Black and Blue upon second listening. That's a song that sometimes, all jokes aside, Geoff, that when I first heard it, or when I first had Hard Candy was one of my, I thought it, like you, maybe somewhat mediocre, but certain times that I've heard it live or like that one, I was like, wow, this is quite a good song.
Sometimes they grow on you, or you hear it. Like Colorblind is a song that I never loved that much, but every time I hear them play it live, it's great, and I'm like, I don't know why I don't listen to this song on the studio version, but when they play it live, they get me every single time, 100%, So I was going to say, I had to look at those set lists. There were only 4 songs that they repeated the 2 nights that had been released or were from the album. So Rain King, Omaha, Angels, and Hanging Around were the only repeats the 2 nights, which is amazing, other than unreleased
of the
songs.
Release stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They repeat the unreleased stuff, which is interesting. It's also kind of ballsy, right? That those are the songs they're repeating.
Yes. And then Good Time, they only played it the first night. Carriage, they only played it the second night. But then, night 1, Mr. Jones, Round Here, Recovering, Have You Seen Me Lately, Good Night, Elizabeth, Wish I Was a Girl, only played that night. Night 2, Carriage, Anna Begins, Sullivan Street, Murder 1, Catapult, Long December, High Life. I mean, I was like, man, I saw a lot of good songs in 2 nights, like that's incredible.
The other thing that's interesting is it's that you mentioned that first night, how many, I think you could probably count on one, maybe you get to a second hand, but of full shows they've played since its release that doesn't have a Long December. That's a really rare thing that you got to see that first night of a show without that's a full show, right? Obviously they played radio things where they didn't play it, but to play like a 2-hour show and not hit a Long December has been a very, very rare thing for them. And I actually really like that the version of Long December the second night, which is the solo piano, maybe with Charlie. I felt like I could kind of hear like accordion at different parts of it, maybe, but certainly the stripped down version of A Long December, I'm a real fan of, where it's just kind of him.
Was that 2000? This is 2001,
One.
right?
And if anyone's going to looking for them, it's August 27th and 28th, 2001. And again, if you go in the hard candy era of Crowstown, you'll find them.
Well, it's funny you said that, and we'll talk about this in a future show. As I just started, and I went through 7 of them. As I said, I've been to 19 shows, and at one point I did have a spreadsheet about what songs I've seen live. And years ago, when I had the first, remember I'm a math guy, but then I lost it and got rid of it. So I started doing it, and it's funny. One of my 2001 shows. Maybe both of them, Long December was not played, so that might be the 1 year.
That
so
year
it might be the 1 year. One thing I'll talk about you offline is that the one show I went to, which was one of the colleges, it's actually a college that nobody knows about, including me. I think it's called like Washington College. It's not Washington Lee. It's not University, not George Washington, and it's in around the Chesapeake of Maryland. And I know the set list does not seem to be available anywhere. So it'll be interesting if there's a bootleg. We'll look at that.
Look. Though, at the very least, though, you could probably take an educated guess, given they played a lot. That college tour, because remember, Matt was out. You didn't tell that story in the book, Jeff. That college tour, the set lists are pretty consistent. Although I actually really, really love a lot of those shows. I think they sound really great on that tour, with whatever they were doing to the songs at that point. Maybe because Matt was out, they were rearranging them slightly in ways that I happen to like, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would say, I'm a big alt guy. Some of the alts are the bigger ones, right? Rain King has Thunder Road and then Oh Susanna. Although, of course, he mentions Louisiana Oh Susanna, which people, that gets a strong, that's one of my least favorite Rain King alts, but that gets a pretty big response. So I guess it makes sense that he's singing Oh Susanna in New Orleans.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But one of my favorites in here, they do Come Pick Me Up in the middle of Round Here, which is one of those songs that, like, I know I've made the comment a bunch, and you may not have heard it, but like that sometimes I don't love when the alt kind of doesn't really fit the theme of the song. And I'm not really sure that Come Pick Me Up fits in the middle of Round Here from a thematic perspective. He just sings the shit out of that song, though. And it just, right. I just think it always sounds great how they play it.
Yeah, there's a clip that came out online a few years ago of him singing, 4 or 5 lines from 3 a.m., I think it was, by Rob Thomas. He's just on stage with Rob Thomas at some club or something, and Rob sings about half the song and then gives it to Adam, who sings it. I've never heard him sing it. And you're just like, man, this guy could just take anybody's song and just, you just did better than their entire career, in a few lines of this song. You just took their signature song and he just owned them completely. Like, he's such a great singer, whether it's his song or somebody else's song. It just, his ability to, sing other people's songs always blows me away.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
Yeah. Well, he's very good, I think, intellectually at recontextualizing those songs. Very rarely do you hear him sing a song and go, oh, it kind of sounds like the original. And as a result, again, sometimes it works, maybe sometimes it doesn't. But if you're tuned to him, hearing him sing, a lot of times you'll go like, man, that does sound better to me than any time I've ever heard that original song. Even heavily covered songs. Like,
right.
I've heard a million different people do Friend of the Devil, and I still think he sings the shit out of Friend of the Devil. A million people have done Big Yellow Taxi or You Ain't Going Nowhere. And I'm like, if I'm picking a version, I'm probably picking the Counting Crows versions of those songs. Even if I'm probably not picking You Ain't Going Nowhere. I've never really liked that song very much, but
I forget if you mentioned it in the book. That anyway, I know we're wrapping up, and I do have one question. This is not it that I definitely want to end with, but yeah, when we were talking, or I was talking about his kind of recent obsession of kind of Palisades Park and the suite and things flowing, and I know that he was somewhat inspired by. At some of the shows they were playing they were playing a Beatles suite, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the Golden when they were doing medley, right?
Yeah, the medley. Right. I know that somewhat inspired him too. So anyway, that was interesting. Chris, do you have a final couple questions? I do have one that I want to end with.
So the one I objected, did you end up getting to listen to any of that 2006 show I sent you? The parking lot one?
Yeah, so a little bit. And yeah, I did. And of course heard him introduce or maybe it's his post introduction to Big Yellow Taxi, which was fun to hear him talking about how they were contractually required to play this song at that show.
Yeah.
Yes, so I did.
He's like, it's a very anti-parking lot song, but for some reason they wanted us to play it, and we're okay with playing it. We're fine to play it. We like playing the song, but it's a very because Geoff mentions in the book there's a show where they played like they basically played a parking lot in 2006,
right?
And I found that version of that song, and he literally talks about playing how weird it is to be playing Big Yellow Taxi in what is apparently a giant parking lot.
Oh, so
somewhere
funny.
outside Kansas City.
Yeah, and he said, I don't think they listened to the lyrics very carefully. It's a beautiful parking lot, but I don't think you've listened too carefully to the lyrics of this song. Anyway, no, so I really appreciate that, and thank you so much. You know, I in some ways I almost wish I could just go back with every single show in hand and revise and correct.
Well, that's what you do a second book that's all just we'll just start sending you stuff, and you'll try to a second under like an addendum with just footnotes with all that concert lyrics to these around this time.
Oh my gosh!
Which is also, it's funny actually. I pulled it up. I think because I paraphrased it because I started typing it. I was like, this is so interesting when he started saying this. But we talked about how literate Counting Crows fans. He says they don't listen to the lyrics, but you know that you're all very literate Counting Crows fans. So we are, right? We're all very literate Counting Crows fans, and we've listened and we knew what the lyrics were about there. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'll as we tend to wrap up again, this or not again, but this might be a two-part episode. But I do want to end with the elephant in the room, which is that not only you wrote this book, but whatever this is, less than 3 months into it, that Adam knows the book, has a copy of the book, has probably read the book, or so. Please, can you talk about how you know that Adam knows about the book, and maybe that could lead to later an interview with him or whatever, or just that what that means to you, that obviously for a lot of your life, you really.
I know. I mean, I know he is a fan of these types of books. You know, he reads these types of books just like I do and other people do. Like some people read mysteries and some people read romance novels, and I read rock bios. I do. And he does as well. I just know this from interviews, and I know it from seeing his bookshelf. He's a fan of this genre. So I said it wouldn't surprise me at all if he read this book because he reads these books. And secondly, since there's never been a book, I would think that he has to think the same thing I thought. How's nobody ever written a book about us? This is insane. Like we've sold 20 million albums. We have songs that are beloved by, 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds. Everybody knows this. Our songs play everywhere continuously. How come nobody's ever written a book about our band? That's crazy. So I kind of figured that because I knew that he reads these types of books and also that he has to feel, as many of us do, like a little, taken aback by the lack of respect, shall we say, for the band, that he may, be able to get a copy of the book. When I was finishing the book, I looked to see where they were playing. I knew that they would be playing, and I noticed, oh, this is great. They're going to be playing in Omaha, Nebraska. I was going to be visiting, friends and family in Kansas City at the time. That's my hometown. And I thought I could drive up to Omaha. I've done that trip before. I could drive up to Omaha and maybe somehow give them a copy of the book or something. That would be amazing. And then when I went online to look, I saw, they have these VIP, go to the sound check tickets and stuff. I've never done anything like that in my entire life. And they're kind of expensive too. And so I thought that's kind of crazy, but I thought, wow, that kind of motivated me to finish the book. And I thought if I could finish the book and, buy this ticket, maybe I could actually hand a copy to him personally. That would be incredible. So long story short, I go to the show and go to the backstage, whatever the backstage thing is. They have their concierge there. And I tell him, hey, listen, I wrote this book about Adam and I'd really love to give him a copy. Is there any way you can get it to him? And he said, I just saw Adam like 1 minute ago backstage. I'll take it to him right now. And I said, great, let me write something in it. So at least, whatever. I wish I'd had a lot more time to think about what I was going to write in there as this guy's standing there waiting for me. So I scribble something in the book, and he takes it back there and comes back a few minutes later and he says, Adam has the book and he knows you're coming to soundcheck. So I said, great. All right. So we go to sound check. There's maybe not even 10 of us there. It's a big open floor. There are no seats on the floor. So we're just standing on the open floor of this Omaha venue, watching the band doing their sound check. And they do one song. Yeah, I'd have to go look. Maybe it was
Can
Michelangelo.
I ask how many people were at the sound check? The one time I did this, I want to say it was like 30 or something.
No.
But
This maybe 10. I don't even think it was 10.
Oh,
It was really small.
okay.
It's the concierge. I have video footage so I could look, but 7 to 10 at the most. A very
When you
small
say
number.
concierge, it's not security. That's just someone who was in charge of the sound check people and stuff. Make
He
sure you're in
works
the
for the
right.
band. Yes, he works for the
Okay.
band. It's a guy named Charlie who works for the band, and he's
Okay.
there to just kind of be our liaison and kind of keep an eye on us, help out. So he's the guy who took it to him backstage, and so we're there at the sound check, and it was that guy Charlie and just a few of us. I mean, I really do think it was like 7 of us or something who were watching the band. They do a song. I think it was Michelangelo. That sounds great, very beautiful. And then Adam comes up to the microphone and says, insider information. The reason that Steve Bowman left the band, and he starts talking about why Steve Bowman wasn't in the band anymore. And he says something that he's said publicly before, which was that I like Steve Bowman a lot more now that he's not in the band than I ever did when he was in the band. He said that publicly. So I think I'm fair game to say that. So, and I thought, wow, that's crazy. And then he starts talking about the reason Matt Malley left the band, and he starts talking about the reason Ben Mines left the band. And I'm thinking to myself, it sounds like he's talking about things from the book, but I also thought there's no way that he's talking about things from the book. I've never been to one of these sound checks. So I don't know how he acts at these sound checks, if he talks to people or what he does. I have no idea, but I'm thinking there is no way he's talking about the book. First of all, I just gave it to him, but I did think maybe he's got a copy, but it never occurred to me that it could possibly be talking about the book. I just thought he's coming out here to tell us these crazy stories about why different people have left the band. And so I asked him, because he's talking about Matt Malley. Oh, and so he turns to Immergluck, and Immergluck says something, and he says, no, that's in chapter 4. You got to read chapter 5, blah, blah, blah. So I said to my friend, he's definitely talking about the book, So my friend taps me, he says, say something. So I said, Adam, because they were talking about Matt Malley, and I said, does this have something to do with the Rolling Stone article or the letter that got printed in Rolling Stone? And so Adam turns to me and he comes and starts talking to me directly and telling me the story about, it's in the book, but about Matt Malley's letter that he wrote the week of the 2004 election that was printed in Rolling Stone. And so my friend starts to videotape, and Adam says, don't tape this. And so I don't want to repeat, I'll tell you guys off the record, but I don't want to repeat what he said because, I don't know, he said, don't tape it. So I won't say what he said, but it's probably things that he said before. Anyway, he's talking about why different people left the band. I said, was it something to do with the election and the letter in Rolling Stone? And he's talking about that a little bit. And I said, was it something to do with the yoga meditation thing that he got into? And he said, no, like that stuff was all, I wrote about this in the book. Matt Malley was very into this like yoga meditation stuff. He got way into it before he was in Counting Crows. He was so into it that his guru arranged a marriage to, someone else who was, a follower of this. And so he was way into it. And my point in the book was that at the very least, this put him at odds with his bandmates who were like, rock and roll guys out on the road, drinking, partying, whatever. So I thought, I don't know if this was a problem or whatever, but I just can imagine you have some very incongruent lifestyles here on the same tour bus, and that's had to lead to some tensions. But I didn't, anyway, so Adam said that stuff was all very good for him. He wasn't brainwashed or taken advantage of or anything like that. He was into that before he was in the group. And it kind of, Matt Malley said it kept me grounded and everything. So Adam said that stuff was never a problem and was not a problem. He talked about some other things that were. And so I'm trying to think. He said, are there any other questions? And I said, are you going to do an interview for the revised second edition of the book? And he was... And he was like, he kind of laughed, like I was joking. I wasn't joking at him. But then he did. He turned to me and looked at me very seriously and said, thank you for writing this book. And to me, it was just like, I'm done. Like, I don't need to hear anything else anyone has to say about the book, because all I wanted to know was that, he appreciated where I was coming from as somebody who reads these types of books, and also that he understands that this book was written with a deep respect for the music, first and foremost. That's why I did it that way. So he turns and walks off. And as he's leaving, I said, Charlie, wait, Charlie Gillingham. I have some copies of the book for the band. And so Charlie comes over and hops off the stage, and we sit and talk for several minutes. And I had copies of the book, and I said, okay, here's 6 copies of the book, because I already gave one to Adam. And he said, we have 2 backstage, so we just need 5. I only need 5. We've got 2. We've already got 2. So this is when I knew that Adam had already had the book and had already read it prior to this, because I was like, how could he have just read this book when he just got it? But he had a copy of the book and had been going around. And the production guy, Charlie, not the keyboard player, Charlie, said, oh yeah, everybody's been reading this backstage, and all the lighting guys or sound guys are reading it and stuff. This was the night of the show, now that they had the book, they're circulating it. And Charlie said he loved the cover, and was very happy, just thought it was a cool book and everything. He told me that he thought that the Matt Malley thing was good reporting. That was the term that he used. And, he said, it seemed like he was saying, the yoga stuff didn't have anything to do with it. But it did sort of seem like it was this letter in Rolling Stone that was kind of the tipping point for Matt Malley, and what sort of ended things for him. It was interesting. Like, I didn't know Matt Malley became a big rig truck driver after his career with the band.
I didn't know that either.
Small fact that was in the book that I didn't know until I started researching whatever became of Matt Malley. So and Charlie kind of got pulled away from us after that, but it was an incredible moment just getting to talk with Adam and Charlie a little bit about the book, knowing that they had seen it, had read it. Just having Adam say that to me, I mean, that's all I would ever want, really. That's it. I'm done. Like, thank you, Adam. And I'll tell you what, and I really mean this very sincerely. When I talk to guys like you and other fans that I've talked to about the book, and they have seen 50 shows or they've seen 19 shows, I'm going, if y'all hate this book, then I know I've done something wrong, because you're the real experts here. And so if you like the book at all, I feel like I've done my job, and I really am very grateful that you like the book. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much.
I bought it without like any sort of review and tore through it. That's the thing. If you're the type of person who loves going to see Counting Crows shows in the summer, where they sing the saddest possible songs but that feel like they're right for summer, like
right.
Mrs. Potter's and Hard Candy, this is the book for you. This is your beach read. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
Put some Counting Crows shows on in your headphones.
You'll
and sit
love
at the
it.
beach
And
take this in.
It's great. And I think, to be honest, you might have to mention it. I don't think it's actually been mentioned on Reddit. I'm not on Facebook. And you know what? I think it might have came on as on my Amazon once as a suggested, like before you released it. I think like months before, I think it like coming soon. And then I forgot about it. And then Chris said, by the way, I got my copy of the book. I was like, what book? Because I'm not on the Facebook group. So, but yeah, as soon as I got it, I devoured it on the plane. And that's why I didn't have all the notes, because I read some of it on the plane when I, was worried about turbulence, not taking notes or whatever. But then I read it when I came back. So that's great. So no, I love hearing that, Adam. Thank you for it. That actually made me feel kind of warm inside. Although I am sorry to hear that that's all the validation you need. I thought us on Sullivan Street.
That was what you needed. It's all about Sullivan Street. Yeah.
So thank you so much. And we I guess we'll wrap this interview up now.
Okay.
Unless anybody else has anything to say, and we look forward to inviting you back onto the podcast soon. So thanks so much for this special. It was such a great conversation. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it too. There's nothing more fun than sitting around talking about the Counting Crows. So you guys are onto something here with the Sullivan Street thing. Well done, gentlemen.
So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time down here on Sullivan Street. Goodbye.